Get up and grind. 4 short words, yet they separate the people who dream from the people who build. Every morning, the world resets the scoreboard. Every morning, someone out there is hungrier than you. And every morning, you're faced with a choice: surrender to comfort or step into the arena where growth, greatness, and grit are forged. Success doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to movement. Today is not just another day. Today is the day you decide to rise, to push, to fight for the life you refuse to leave unlived. Get up and grind. Purpose is the force that pulls a man out of bed long before motivation arrives. When a man knows why he's fighting, the grind stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like alignment. His psychology responds to direction. He is wired to move toward a mission that feels bigger than his own comfort. Without that inner compass, even strong men drift, lose conviction, and begin to question their own value. But when the why is clear, even the hardest road becomes meaningful and struggle transforms into fuel. Clarity of purpose is also what gives women insight into a man's resilience. When a woman sees a man driven not by ego but by intention, she understands the depth of his commitment. She recognizes that his grind is not avoidance, but responsibility, not obsession, but devotion. Women often observe before they judge, and they can sense whether a man is anchored in purpose or simply running from himself. A man whose why is grounded stands differently, speaks differently, and navigates life with a steadiness that invites trust. A man rises faster when his purpose resonates beyond his own needs. The why that wakes him up becomes the silent contract he holds with himself, with his future, and with those who believe in him. Pressure becomes powerful the moment a man stops seeing it as an enemy and starts recognizing it as a signal. A man's psychology is built to respond to challenge. When tension rises, something within him awakens. Instead of collapsing under expectation, he is meant to channel it, convert it, and allow it to sharpen his focus. Pressure reveals what truly matters. It strips away the noise and exposes the mission beneath the stress. When a man chooses to reinterpret pressure as direction instead of danger, he turns weight into momentum and struggle into clarity. Women often see the transformation before he does. A woman can sense when a man is carrying pressure with purpose rather than fear. She notices the difference between a man overwhelmed and a man driven, between avoidance and accountability. From her perspective, pressure becomes a window into his character, how he handles adversity, how he anchors himself, and how he shows up for those who depend on him. When she sees him convert strain into strength, concern turns into admiration. For both men and women, pressure is not just a test. It is a revelation of intent, resilience, and the deeper reasons behind the grind. Courage begins the moment a man decides to take the first hard step, even when he has no guarantee of success. A man's psychology is built to anticipate risk, to feel the pull of hesitation, yet also to crave the breakthrough that only action can provide. That first step is rarely glamorous. It's the moment he confronts his own doubts, his comfort, and the versions of himself he's trying to outgrow. By moving anyway, he proves to himself that progress is not about perfection, but about the willingness to start before he feels ready. Women often understand the weight of that initial step in ways men sometimes overlook. A woman sees the internal battle he fights before he moves. She notices when he is wrestling with uncertainty, questioning his ability, or standing at the edge of a decision he knows he must make. From her perspective, the first step a man takes is not just movement, it is an expression of his courage, his promise to grow, and his willingness to evolve. She recognizes the shift in his demeanor when he breaks inertia, when he chooses action over excuses, and when he steps into the arena instead of watching from the sidelines. Strength comes from a man's ability to choose discipline even when his mood fights against him. A man's psychology is deeply influenced by how he responds to his own emotions, whether he becomes a servant to them or a strategist above them. Mood is inconsistent, unpredictable, and easily swayed by stress, fatigue, or environment. Discipline, however, is a promise he makes to himself. When a man decides that his actions will not be negotiated by how he feels in the moment, he becomes someone who can be trusted by his future. Discipline builds identity long before it builds results. Women often notice the quiet power of a man who consistently honors his commitments, regardless of his emotional ups and downs. A woman can sense when a man moves with intention rather than impulse, when he shows up not because it's easy, but because he said he would. From her perspective, discipline is not rigidity. It is reliability, strength, and self-governance. She sees the difference between a man who is controlled by moods and one who is guided by principles. That difference becomes a reflection of his maturity, his stability, and his capacity to lead himself through difficult seasons with integrity and resolve. Progress expands the moment a man stops trying to get everything right and starts allowing himself to move. A man's psychology is often shaped by the pressure to perform flawlessly, to avoid mistakes, and to protect his image. But perfection is a trap that keeps him stalled at the starting line. When he gives himself permission to fail forward, he unlocks momentum, the very force that builds confidence, resilience, and direction. Every imperfect attempt teaches him something, strengthens something, or sharpens something. Movement becomes its own form of mastery, and the grind becomes less about avoiding errors and more about accelerating growth. Women often observe the power of a man's momentum long before he recognizes it himself. A woman can see when he is learning, adapting, and evolving through action rather than hesitation. She notices the shift in his energy when he stops obsessing over flawless outcomes and starts celebrating courageous attempts. From her perspective, failure is not a sign of weakness, but evidence of engagement, investment, and grit. She respects a man who keeps moving forward even when the path is uncertain, because that consistency reveals his character more than any polished result ever could. A man builds unshakable confidence by collecting experiences, not by protecting his pride. Each step, each lesson, each stumble becomes part of the momentum that carries him toward the life he is grinding for. When he embraces forward motion over perfection, he becomes unstoppable. Not because he never falls, but because he never stops getting back up. Leadership begins the moment a man decides to hold himself accountable to a standard higher than his comfort. A man's psychology responds powerfully to structure, direction, and a sense of internal order. When he leads himself, his actions, his habits, his impulses, he steps into the identity of someone who can be trusted with greater responsibility. Self-leadership is not about controlling every moment. It's about mastering the choices that shape his character. The grind becomes intentional when he understands that no title, position, or relationship will compensate for a lack of discipline in the way he governs himself. Women often recognize the strength of a man's self-leadership before he fully understands its impact. A woman can sense when a man moves with self-respect, self-restraint, and self-direction, because these qualities create stability in his presence. From her perspective, a man who leads himself is not unpredictable or reactive. He is anchored. She pays attention to how he handles stress, temptation, and responsibility, not because she expects perfection, but because these behaviors reveal the foundation he stands on. His consistency becomes a signal of emotional maturity, and his ability to navigate himself becomes a source of trust. Growth accelerates when a man understands that influence starts inward, not outward. A man cannot guide others, family, relationships, teams, or communities, if he is constantly wrestling with the chaos he refuses to confront within himself. By taking ownership of his mindset, his routines, and his responses, he becomes someone whose leadership is not declared, but demonstrated. His life begins to reflect direction rather than drift, purpose rather than impulse, and conviction rather than confusion. And in mastering the leadership of his own world, he naturally earns the respect, confidence, and loyalty to lead in the worlds around him.